Welcome to the Stellantis Tech and AI podcast. I'm Dale Jewett, your host, and in this episode, we're going to talk about noise and sounds. And our guest is Brandon Sims, who is the NVH performance engineer for Stellantis. And it's nice having you with us today, Brandon.
Hello, Dale. Thank you again for inviting me on. I'm excited to talk.
All right. So let's talk about your background first. How does someone make a career out of sounds?
Yeah, so I have a background in mechanical engineering, and a few years out of school and in the automotive industry, I heard of this engineering area called NVH, where engineers were working with microphones and measuring sound, and I was immediately intrigued. I've been playing music since my teens. I absolutely love music. And later, when I started playing in bands, I got hooked on music technology and recording. So the thought of combining my engineering background with my love for music and recording was really a natural evolution. At that point, I went back to school to get another engineering degree, this time focused on acoustics, which ultimately led me to the NVH lab here at Stellantis.
Okay, so I don't want to assume that everybody listening has an idea of our lingo. So let's start with what exactly is NVH?
Yes, that's a very good place to start. So NVH stands for noise, vibration, and harshness, and it is one of the key vehicle sciences within Stellantis. NVH is first concerned with making the vehicle comfortable for the driver and passengers, and in its early days mainly just looked at minimizing excessive noise and annoying vibration levels in passenger vehicles. But as the automotive industry has evolved and customers' expectations have changed, NVH has now branched out into not just minimizing noise and vibration, but really expanded into improving the sound quality of the vehicle as a whole. So features and components that would have been an afterthought decades ago, such as a door lock sound or the whine of a coolant pump or a turn signal, get just as much attention now than your standard legacy engine noises.
Okay.
And this was really one of the main draws to NVH for me because it touches so many aspects and components of the vehicle. And you could spend a career studying and going deep on one attribute and still learn and be challenged in this field.
I would guess that one of the other challenges is there's probably not one standard for good sounds versus bad sounds. It's sort of like, I'm sure, what our designers go through. Someone may truly love one of our vehicle designs, but the person next to them can say that does not do it for me. So I'm not sure how we try and determine what are good sounds versus less good sounds.
Yeah, there's definitely some subjectivity to it, just like you said, when in the visual design area. But for some of these legacy sound sources like internal combustion engine noise, wind noise, tire noise, we have an extensive amount of historical data to draw from to know what a customer would consider good or bad. And then through either like virtual simulation or measurement of this data, we can compare back to those historical targets. Now, when we encounter a new component or a combination of components, or even a new feature altogether, this is where we will have to do something extra and set up what we call a jury evaluation to determine what a customer will consider good or bad. And to do this, we'll collect or create sound files and have a large group or a jury rate their impression of the sounds. And then we'll take that feedback and correlate it to our measured sound and vibration data to define the levels that we need to set. A good example of this is ventilated seat blowers.
Uh-huh.
That was a relatively new feature when I first joined the NVH lab here at Stellantis. And I remember specifically going through this jury evaluation process to determine what a customer expected in terms of seat blower noise and tonality.
Do customers want to hear the seat blower? I happen to know I have this in my vehicle today, and I do hear the fan come on a little bit, but I'm not sure that that's important to me, but maybe it is to our other customers.
Yeah, I think there's a range. I think people like to know that the feature is operating. Sound can definitely give us some feedback to proper operation and usage. At the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, you do not want that sound to be interfering with conversations in the car or playing over a soundtrack or music that you have playing. So it's
Okay,
a it's definitely a fine line there.
interesting. Well, you and I, because we've been around for a while, and I think a lot of people would say, "Oh, that's a great sound," particularly if you hear a sports car, tearing down the road or firing up first thing in the morning. We're well accustomed to internal combustion engine sounds in vehicles, but sound is taking on this whole new importance because the EV era is dawning, and you can stand next to an EV that's energized and ready to roll and not hear anything. So
hmm
it's kind of a blank slate. How do we even begin to define what an EV vehicle should sound like?
Yeah, as you stated there, there's such a legacy for internal combustion engine sounds, whether it's like the quiet refinedness of a luxury vehicle or the loudness of like a high performance muscle car. And we're at the turning point with this larger adoption of EVs in the market and really still trying to determine what a customer expects from the sound of an EV. And I think similar to internal combustion engines, it's going to be a broad range because there's going to be people who want refinement and quietness, and then there's going to be people who want something that's more of a ICE vehicle type experience, but yet in the packaging and energy efficiency of an electric vehicle. So it's going to come down to really
Hmm.
listening to the customer to understand what characteristics they really care about and what they do not, and then either design to that blank slate that you talked to that an electric vehicle can provide or provide something more in terms of sound.
Okay. From where I sit, I would expect that an engineer in your position has a lot more choices when it comes to EVs. I understand, with an internal combustion engine and you want to tune the sound, well, you can change the intake a bit, you change the exhaust, the typical, hey, let's open up the exhaust so we get ourselves, a nice big sound, but
Yes.
each engine has its own signature. A four-cylinder engine is never going to be able to sound like a V8, no matter what you do to the mechanical parts of the vehicle. But as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to sound in EVs, I mean, this is all generated sound. So
hmm
the musician in you must be great. It's like having an entire synthesizer in front of you, right?
Yes, absolutely. Like you said, use that term blank slate. We call it the blank canvas. And yeah, you're no longer restricted just to the mechanical parts of the vehicle, like you said, the intake, exhaust, manifolds. Those mechanical influences are no longer there, and you can come in and really design from the ground up, which was really what we did with the Dodge Daytona Charger EV.
Okay. Hey, let's talk about that for a minute because what we've done with that vehicle is really quite cool. It's it's an EV that's a muscle car. And I'm sure that's probably what the brief that the Dodge brand gave you. Make our EV sound like a muscle car. Can you tell me the story? How did we make that happen?
The Dodge brand had such a clear vision on where they wanted the Daytona EV to be from a sound experience. Not so much as to what it would immediately sound like, but the fact that it had to satisfy the one really core pillar of the vehicle line. It had to sound like a Dodge. So that began the exploration down the sound design process. So we started with just general brainstorming and then moved on to listening and recording some historic Dodge vehicles. And these were used as inspiration and some actual sound elements as we moved into the sound design process. And we iterated on that for a bit and then eventually built a drivable prototype for people to get into and experience firsthand. And there were many loops around that sound design cycle to hone in and get to the sound theme that we launched with. But in the end, we were able to really push the envelope in that vehicle and bring an experience that was missing from other high performance EVs. So the fratsonic chambered exhaust that you spoke about really employs some really neat technology with multiple drivers, a very large air enclosure, and two ducted plenum chambers that we tune to move enough air within the enclosure and plenum to generate sound pressure levels to match the Hemi V8s. So this is moving enough air to generate over 120 decibels of output. And even more impressively, generate a lot of that output below 50 hertz, where you really can feel it in addition to hear the sound.
Just like the traditional muscle car. That's pretty interesting.
Exactly.
I'm curious, particularly when it came to developing that system for the Dodge Charger Daytona. Was it more important for the noise that the people inside the vehicle hear versus the noise that the people outside the vehicle hear?
I think it was both. The Dodge team definitely wanted it to be an experience for the driver and passengers in the car. But as you alluded to at the beginning, part of the legacy of a Dodge internal combustion engine is the experience of the bystanders around the car. Mm-hmm. When you hear that startup sound on a Hemi V8, for example, everybody knows where that's coming from.
So the whole neighborhood knows.
The whole neighborhood knows. So it was important for equally as important for the bystanders and people around the car to be able to hear this vehicle both during the startup and shutdown and driving situations. And it's very impressive even from a drive-by standpoint, hearing the sound from the exhaust system as this car is moving down the street next to you.
Okay, Brandon. So, and as I understand it, I mean, the fratsonic chambered exhaust, the components are primarily in the back and underneath the vehicle. So I think some people would assume that all the noise is, directed outside of the vehicle. Mm-hmm. Do you pipe sound inside the vehicle too? Let's say that you're sitting there with the windows closed. I'm just curious how you make sure that people inside the vehicle get some sound as well as the people outside the vehicle.
Yeah, so because the system has such a high output and we wanted to stay true to the exhaust system design, majority of the sound, even from the driver and passengers inside the vehicle, majority of that sound is coming from the exterior system. That's easily 95% of the contribution. There is a small, let's say 5% contribution that is some sound elements that are being played only inside through the audio system. And these would be what we would call trigger sounds that are specific to the operator pressing a certain button in the vehicle, where we would have, say, a sound that's associated with the power shot feature on the car. Mm-hmm. So those types of sounds are obviously only broadcast inside the car. But again, to reiterate, it's about a 95% contribution purely from the fratsonic chambered exhaust on the back of the car.
Cool. Well, since we're talking about the interior, let's talk about active sound design. How much of what we hear in a car is real versus enhanced these days?
Yeah, so there's definitely a spectrum here. We have vehicles within the Stellantis portfolio that take sound directly from a microphone on the engine block, filter it, and then reproduce it back into the vehicle cabin to increase the driving experience. So this alone is a type of active sound design or active sound enhancement. But when you think about it, it's really about as real as you can get. Then we have other systems which are a step up from that, which just subtly augment or fill in specific engine orders to increase the pleasantness or the sportiness of the engine sound. Mm-hmm. And then we have systems like we just talked about on the Dodge Daytona EV, which uses multiple layers of sound, some recorded from actual vehicles, some that were invented solely in a studio, to create a sound theme in real time that wouldn't exist at all in an electric vehicle. So this kind of shows you the spectrum from taking sound directly off of an engine block to something that's wholly created from a blank slate. In all of these cases, the goal of active sound design is to enhance the sound and experience. If it does not draw attention to itself and it matches the feel like it's part of the car, then really we've succeeded.
So, Brandon, does your work also include technologies like active noise cancellation, which I know we have in some of our vehicles, and which I think people find is helpful, particularly if you're using the system to manage a conversation with someone while you're driving?
Yeah, those that falls directly into our group, and those two things really stand side by side with each other, especially when it comes to active noise cancellation in an internal combustion engine. So in terms of the sound design, we're really balancing what do we want the customer to hear and what adds to the experience and what is a detractor. So on the detracting side, we would bring in active noise cancellation and start to reduce or tame down engine sounds or engine orders that do not add to the experience at all or really hinder it, right? Like a low frequency rumble, road boom, those types of things are things that we really go after often in terms of active noise cancellation. And then that second point, which is the active sound enhancement, we can again almost bring in and draw in specific engine sounds that we want to enhance and balance that off with the noise cancellation to really just dial in the vehicle to the way that we want it.
Interesting. So you're really tailoring the cockpit for sound.
Absolutely. Yep. This again goes back to looking at the vehicle as a whole, right? We're no longer just trying to get rid of completely annoying sounds and annoying vibration to the customer. It's really about tailoring that cockpit experience as much as we can.
Okay. Hey, I don't want you or our audience to think I'm just obsessed with sound, although I can be at times obsessed with sound. But, vibration and harshness are the other two letters in the NVH. And you might think in the beginning, well, hey, the perfect thing is no vibration and no harshness. But I think, as we've discussed, there are good and less desirable levels of each of those things. Talk to me about how feedback, haptic feedback, vibrations, and maybe some I don't want to say intentional harshness, but how do those two factors play a role, particularly in EVs, again, since there's no engine per se to induce vibration in the vehicle?
Yeah, for high performance EVs, I definitely think it adds to the experience. Early into the Daytona EV project, we looked at different levels of this, looking at all aspects of how much vibration did we want to induce back into the car? Was it necessary? Those kinds of questions. But this really came down to how and why we designed the Fratsonic exhaust the way we did. So we were able to really bring some of that vibration back into the vehicle body and hence the seats and the steering wheel to bring that whole sensory experience together. And that was done. There's really an engineering project behind managing the isolation of the exhaust to the vehicle body to pass the desired vibrations back into the body. And there's a lot of different ways that the industry is kind of looking at adding vibration and things back into the vehicle. Again, it's going to come down to, what is a customer's expectation in terms of the car. But again, for a high performance electric vehicle like this, the car is incredibly quick with or without the sound and vibration aspect. But I think when you get in the car, it's definitely more fun to drive when all of your senses are engaged in terms of the sound, the feel, and the speed.
Okay. And does that, vibrations and stuff, does that even extend to where we might try and simulate a gear change in an electric vehicle or maybe even a CVT type transmission? Because again, it's something that a customer expects. Is that part of your purview?
Yeah, It definitely does. So the control technology in EV powertrains is really flexible. And we have some great people within Stellantis working on powertrain calibration that, if they wanted to, could duplicate really an ICE vehicle behavior in terms of what you brought up with gear shifts and acceleration sensations. So similar to sound, the EV platform even gives us a blank slate to build off when it comes to adding in gear shifts or other driving sensations. So my role as a performance engineer within NVH is to make sure that the sound design matches up with whatever the vision is on the dynamic driving aspect, so that what our powertrain calibration team comes up with, and whether it's simulated shifting or some really unique driving condition, that the sound matches up to all of those cases. So as I said before, as long as the sound matches up with the dynamic driving experience and does not draw attention to itself, then really we've succeeded in accomplishing those goals.
Okay. And Brandon, you'd mentioned earlier that there are times when we gather a jury of people to evaluate sounds. Are there other ways that we evaluate sounds? I'm curious. Is there like a master sound guy in the company who is like, hey, oh yeah, that's a good sound. And concurrent with that, we're a global company. We sell our products globally. How do we account for what I'm guessing are regional differences? I'm not sure our customers in Europe treat all sounds the same as we do here in North America.
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, unfortunately, there's not a master person I can go to and just get, final sign off. It comes down to, getting the right people involved with the vision. It You do some of that jury evaluation, but you got to be careful about bringing in too many people. This is very similar in my mind to the way that you would look at music, right? Everybody's got very different and wide-ranging preferences in terms of music. I can say that I like this sound. This sound is the best. This type of music, this genre, and you would have a different opinion. You might say I appreciate that, but that's not my main listening palette. So
That's
it
not
can
my
kind of,
jam, is what you're trying to say.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's hard to, when you're developing something like this, you're never going to appease the masses, but you want to come down again to something that matches the intention and the vibe of the vehicle.
Uh-huh.
And like what you brought up too about regional differences, that's going to be very different. Just the way that we have different cars and different vehicles for let's say the United States market versus something in Europe or Asia. So I think that type of study needs to be done, and that type of evaluation needs to be done on a market to market basis. So that's why I have counterparts that are working on similar projects in Europe, in Italy, in France, and in Asia, that can be a little bit more focused on their region and what the customer's expectations are.
Okay. Maybe you need producer credit instead of just being an engineer, right?
I would love that.
I
Yeah,
mean, that's the guy in the studio when the artist is doing their work. The
that's
producer
right.
makes it all happen, right?
Yeah, maybe royalties too.
Well, that would be interesting. But I'm curious. Do we ever consider reaching outside of the auto industry to someone who has more of an audio focused type talent to get their input?
Oh yeah, that's been done in many different regions for different vehicles. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sometimes some of the best ideas come from somebody who's a little bit distanced from automotive, right? It's easy to because we are around these vehicles for 5, 6, 7 days a week, get really focused on just that. And we got to remember that our customers come from a wide range of different areas too, and different influences. So bringing in outside influences, whether it's on the sound design standpoint or tuning standpoint, is healthy in a lot of cases. And we've done that.
Yeah, because see, what I really need is the heavy metal edition of my Dodge Charger
There you
Daytona.
go.
I'm just letting you know right now, Brendan,
Now you're
because I'm
talking
old
my
and I.
now you're talking my speed, Dale.
Um, are there any other, I mean, besides the jury, do we do anything else to test the sounds so that we don't find that they're either too aggressive or too boring?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to seat time in the vehicle, whether it's, myself or my rest of my team, or even the vehicle integration, product design, and brand teams. So we get a lot of seat time there, and we do a lot of tuning and tweaking. And certain things start to jump out after a few miles of driving, especially when some of these sounds are a little bit too aggressive. But really, if getting the right people in the car will really make sure we're on the right path with the vision, the specific vision for that vehicle. On the Dodge Daytona project, we also had a number of clinics that were performed to get feedback from current internal combustion engine, let's say muscle car enthusiasts, to determine what they liked and disliked on the sound theme as we went through the development.
Hmm.
And we got great feedback from them, even though we were still in the developing process and really developing something new and unique to the industry. And that type of feedback can give us an early indicator if we're leaning too aggressive or too boring. Also, just giving the customer some amount of control over the active sound enhancement allows them to dial it into their own taste. So on the Charger EV, we match the sound level and intensity of the theme to the selectable drive modes. So you yourself, if you feel it's too aggressive for the situation you're driving in, can dial it down or even turn it off so you're not annoying the neighbors for with your startup sound.
Now you're talking, Brandon, because 13-year-old Dale has ideas on what kinds of sounds he wants his car to make, none of which would make anybody happy. So we're going to leave
Yes.
that. We're going to leave that topic alone. The tools that you and your team use, are they really industry specific, or would a guy who lives and makes his living in the music industry in Nashville be comfortable or certainly aware of what you're using?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of the sound design and editing that we do is done in, I'll say, your typical digital audio workstation. That's like programs such as Cubase, Logic, Studio One. Software synthesizers are also, we use those pretty heavily. So these are all the same tools that you would use for creating music or sound effects, and are widely used in Nashville studios and New York studios, all that type. For the second part of it is where it gets a little bit more automotive specific. So that's where you need to really start to link it up with the sound that you created to the actual vehicle inputs. So the accelerator pedal input, the motor speed of the vehicle, the torque request of the vehicle. And this is where we have specific tools that we get into combining the sound design with driving simulators to audition the sound theme in office or a studio. And we now put together a great sound playback studio in the Stellantis NVH lab,
Hmm.
very similar to a home theater surround system, to more accurately put us in environment when auditioning these driving sounds in a simulator.
Okay. That's pretty cool. And it leads me to ask, so someone who's been listening to us chat about this for a while and they're thinking, that is me, that is what I'd really love to do. Any advice and any thoughts on how someone else can do the voodoo that you do?
Voodoo, I do. Yeah, so this is, as I said in the beginning, NVH is truly a wide-ranging discipline, and I think this area of sound design is going to continue to grow. Most of the science that we use on a daily basis hinges on understanding of sound propagation and vibration theory. So an engineering or acoustic background definitely helps, at least to get the fundamental principles down. But as this area evolves, I think there's going to be a need for talent in DSP coding, audio technology, and of course, sound creation itself. So as we continue to create these unique soundscapes for our customers, we're really going to have to pull from a lot of different areas. So I would say that if anyone's interested, definitely research it, reach out, and pursue it.
Cool. Well, Brandon, I have this strong feeling that in a few years we would find you in your garage on the weekends, not necessarily turning wrenches, but turning knobs on a mixing board as you're trying to customize your vehicle to your particular sound taste, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing.
No, it wouldn't be. That sounds fun for the audio enthusiast, all the audio enthusiasts out there.
Yeah, and actually it'd be pretty good. I used to remember, because I'm old, that people used to get together with their vehicles and would have stereo battles back in the day, back when you put big monster stereos in cars.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see all that coming back again, just with, ooh, here's my new Dodge Charger Daytona track that I just did myself, and let the world listen to that. So
Yep.
Brandon, this has been a really interesting conversation, and I really appreciate your time and your insight. And hopefully one of these days you'll let me come down and hang out in the playback studio.
Absolutely. You're welcome anytime, Dale. Thank you again. I really enjoyed this conversation too.
You bet. Well, keep up the good work. Remember, we need the heavy metal edition of something. It doesn't have, a Charger Daytona would be great, but a Ram 1500 heavy metal would work for me just fine too. So hop on that when you have some free time, which I'm sure you don't.
Sounds good. Thank you again, Dale.
Yep, I've truly enjoyed listening to our conversation, so thanks a lot for your time. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the Stellantis Tech and AI podcast, where we speak with some of the brightest minds in the tech and automotive industries. We invite you to follow Stellantis Tech and AI on LinkedIn and Instagram to join the conversation, stay updated on what's ahead, and be a part of the community exploring the fast line of tech and AI in the auto world. We'll be with you again soon.